Hello, welcome back to Artsy-Island-Girl. So today we're going to make a beachy themed seashell card. So these are the three distress colors that I'm using, two distress colors, one Oxide. I'll list them down below. I'm going to do a distressed background on some manila cardstock first before we go on and create the rest of the cards. So I've got my glass media mat here. I'm going to smoosh some of each of the colors, and then I'm misting it with some water so that the colors can run into each other. I'm dipping my manila cardstock in there, and I want to make sure that this first coat covers the whole background. Then I'm going to use my heat gun and I'm going to dry the background. Now it doesn't need to be 100% dry, like 90% is good, but you don't want any pools of wet ink, because if there's anything that's like a pool of wet ink, when you go to tap it into that ink that's left on the mat, you're just going to get really a puddle. So we want to have it as dry as possible, and then we're going to tap the cardstock into the remaining ink on the mat, and then we're going to go back and we're going to dry it, and we're just going to keep repeating this process until we have a background that we like. Now we are die cutting this, so it doesn't need to be completely 100% done, but I just want some variety in the background. And I did look up before doing this, the shell dye that I'm using is Memory Box Tulip Shell. So I did Google what the colors of the shells are in nature, and they are these colors. So I just wanted a little bit of variety. I didn't want a solid colored cardstock. This is just going to add a little bit more interest to it when I create it. So once again, drying the background. If you run out of ink on your media mat, you can always smoosh some more on and reapply it, like add some water to wet it and stuff like that. Typically one application is enough for doing a background of this size, but just know that that's an option if you find you need a little bit more ink. Or if you run out of one color, you can add a little bit more to it. So this is the dye that we are going to use. I'll put it down in the comments down below, the number, so that you can find it. If I find a link for it, I'll add that as well. So I'm just going to simply die cut it. I laid it on the paper the place that I wanted to see when it was die cut. And then it comes with a secondary die, which is the background part, and I'm going to cut out this holographic paper with it because I want to see this as the inside of my shell. Just for something a little bit more interesting. I know most shells don't have a holographic inside, but I didn't have any pearl cardstock to use. So now I'm taking the shell bits out of the die. Any bits that are stubborn, I'm going to use my die pick and I'm going to poke into one of the holes to get that out of the die. And then I've taken all the little bits out. I'm going to use some matte multi-medium to glue it on. And the reason I'm choosing the matte multi-medium is because if any of the glue seeps out underneath, it dries completely matte, so you're not actually going to see it. And because there's lots of little nooks and crannies here, I didn't want to have anything smoosh out and then have it be tacky or be shiny or whatnot. So now I'm going to glue that outline bit to the holographic background. Make sure that all the edges line up perfectly. And then I'm going to take each of the pieces that came out from inside of it, and I'm going to use some Vintage Photo Distress ink, and I'm going to ink around it. And this is just going to give it a little bit of extra dimension and interest rather than being completely flat. So it's just going to give some dimension in the rolls of the shell. And add a little bit of glue to each piece before you glue it back there. And you don't necessarily have to have glue over the entire thing, but any of the bits and pieces that stick out, you definitely want to put some glue down there to hold them down. And we're going to put this all back together just like a puzzle piece. Now the part on the bottom that is supposed to be the inside of the shell, I am going to leave that as is. And I grabbed this piece and inked it, and then realized last minute that this was the piece that is for the inside, the part that I wanted to leave open. So this is being inked completely for no purpose at all. I don't want that. You can save it for something else, or you can toss it. So once again, all these bits are going to be inked a little bit around the edges just to give them some dimension. There's two little tiny sections at the very top. I'm not inking those because they're far too small. You wouldn't actually see it. But any of the bits that are a little bit bigger and that you can see the dimension of it being inked, I will ink it before I glue it in there. This particular one I put glue on before inking it, just forgot about it, but I can easily pull it back up and quickly ink it even with the glue on there. It only takes seconds, but it just adds so much more dimension, and it would have looked strange without it, in my opinion. Now the other thing I'm going to use on this card is Memory Box has a wood planks die, and I've got that right here, and I'm busy die cutting it with some craft cardstock and pulling the pieces out. The pieces are a pain in the butt to pull out, I'll tell you that right now. I found out after this that if you use a Spellbinder's tool in one brush, it comes out much easier, or even like a Sizzix brush, it'll come out much easier. So the little planks, I'm going to ink them around the edges with that Vintage Photo distress ink as well. It's just going to add more dimension to those planks and just make a much more interesting background. Now the card design is not my own. I saw it somewhere. I don't know who made it, and as soon as I find out who came up with that design, I will post it in the comments and credit that person. If you know who originally made it and posted it, just message me and let me know, and I'll gladly put them in the comments because I do like to give credit where credit is due. I just really like the design, and I love the combination of the wood planks with the shell. It looked really, really cool. So gluing the last wood plank down now, and now I'm just going to take some scissors and cut the excess off. I could have been doing this while I was working on it, but just as easy to cut it off afterwards. And all those little bits that are getting cut off can be tossed. We don't need them anymore. And then I'm going to take that Vintage Photo Distress ink and ink around the edges as well. I also put a little bit on the top of the planks, just lightly rubbing it over, just so that the craft cardstock wasn't quite as stark looking. And then I'm going to take my background, I'm going to glue my shell die cut piece on there. I also did this one adding a little bit of pink and blue with the background for the shell, as well as a little bit of pink and blue almost painted on the wood planks, and it also looked quite cool too. Once I have the shell on there, I'm going to take some dark brown cardstock and I'm going to glue that on there as well. If you enjoyed watching, don't forget to hit subscribe to get notified for more videos.